All right, now joining us all the way from Geneva is Dr. Zachary Pakin. He's the Deputy Director of the Better Order Project at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft in Washington, and also a Senior Fellow at the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. Dr. Pakin, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, I want you to weigh in on what the Russian Defense Ministry has said after using this Oreshnik hypersonic missile, where they say that this attack by the Oreshnik is in response to the attack that the Ukrainians tried to carry out on one of Vladimir Putin's residences in Belgorod. And this is a message that's been put out by the Russians. How do you see this?
Well, thanks so much for having me. I think it's a response to many things. It's a response to that alleged Ukrainian attack on Putin's residence. It's a response to the American seizure of a Russian flag-flying vessel, tanker. And then on top of this, I think most importantly, it's a response to the latest summit of the Coalition of the Willing in Paris, in which it appears as though Western countries are preparing to move ahead with some kind of troop deployment to Ukraine after a ceasefire is reached. But of course, Russia has made it clear that that's one of its red lines. And so far, what we've seen is that the Americans have not fully signed on to this. The Coalition of the Willing's final statement speaks only of a proposed U.S. participation in this multinational force in some capacity. And the Russians are basically reiterating their red line with this attack here by basically saying, we can make life very complicated for you. Don't cross this red line. And so I hope that this encourages all parties basically to reach a mutually acceptable compromise that can bring this horrible war to an end.
Interesting. Now, the fact that the Coalition of the Willing in its draft was talking about positioning some of these troops, including that of the Americans, in a buffer zone between Russia and Ukraine. But the Russians have clearly rejected that. They've said that any troops that are stationed even in a buffer zone will become legitimate targets, which effectively means that there cannot be any security guarantees for Ukraine in the course of these peace talks. Does it mean that these peace talks have now effectively failed?
No, not at all. And that doesn't mean that there are not any effective security guarantees for Ukraine. The most important security guarantee for Ukraine is a large and capable Ukrainian military, and they are going to have that. The latest drafts of the 20-point plan point to an 800,000, strong Ukrainian forces after the war. The Ukrainians aren't even going to be able to manage that large of a force in peacetime. So de facto, that means that there's no serious cap on it. Beyond that,
my question to you, Dr. Pakin, if I can just interrupt them, my question to you was about the Coalition of the Willing floating this idea of stationing predominantly NATO troops led by the United States of America, which has been rejected by Russia. With that being the case, can the peace talks proceed from here?
They absolutely can, because you don't need to have, the precise Article 5 application to Ukraine in order for Ukraine to have security guarantees that it can, deem to be significant enough language-wise for its own security. There's going to be some fudging here where basically the language is going to be strong enough for the Ukrainians to be able to say, look what we got, this is good, this is enough for us. And that, the Europeans are going to need to have in order to save face, and that the Russians, of course, are going to have to get something from this overall, framework agreement that they can also use to save face. That's what we're talking about here at this point in time.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Zachary Pakin, for joining us from Geneva and getting us that perspective.
Thanks very much.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.